The boarding pass hit the marble floor before Simone Ellison even understood what had happened. "This seat is not for you," the purser said, loud enough for the entire jet bridge to hear, loud enough that a toddler 2 rows back stopped crying just to stare. "Whatever you think that piece of paper means, ma'am, it does not mean what you think it means." 6 hours earlier, none of this would have seemed possible. 6 hours earlier, Simone Ellison had been the most powerful person in a glass conference room 40 floors above downtown Chicago, and nobody in that jet bridge would meet her eyes. Rewind 6 hours. It is 3:52 in the morning, and the ink on a $5.6 billion acquisition has just gone dry. Simone Ellison sits at the head of a table made of black walnut in a boardroom on the 40th floor of a building she now partially owns, and she does not smile. Her lawyers are smiling. Her bankers are already pouring champagne into paper cups because someone forgot the crystal at midnight. Simone asks for black coffee and a car to O'Hare. That is the whole of her celebration. She is 36 years old, and for 11 years she has built Meridian Dynamics from a 2-desk office above a laundromat on the east side of Detroit into a logistics empire that moves cargo across 4 continents. Tonight at 3:52 a.m., Meridian Dynamics closed on Windward Holdings, the struggling parent company of Skyline Airways, for $5.6 billion. Nobody in the press knows yet. Nobody at the gate will know for another 9 minutes past 8 o'clock. That gap, that 9-minute silence between what is true and what people believe is true, is where this story lives. Simone does not go home to change. There is no time, and there is no need. She has a flight to catch, Seat 1A, Skyline Airways Flight 205, Chicago O'Hare to New York JFK, departing at 8:40 a.m. She needs it more than she has needed anything in months, because tomorrow, in a small cemetery outside Newark, it will be exactly 4 years since they buried her mother, Eleanor Ellison, and Simone has never once missed the anniversary. Not during her MBA finals, not during the merger that almost bankrupted her in year 6, not now, with a $5.6 billion deal barely cold. She promised her mother's headstone she would come every year and stand there at 9 in the morning with fresh white carnations, because carnations were the only flower Eleanor ever said she liked. And Simone intends to keep that promise until she is the one being visited instead of visiting. She arrives at O'Hare's Terminal 5 at 6:15 a.m. Wearing a faded maroon Spelman College hoodie, the fabric gone soft and thin at the elbows from a decade of washing, black leggings, and a pair of white sneakers that have never once been paired with a designer bag. She carries a scuffed brown leather briefcase that holds the master documents from the acquisition, and slung over one shoulder is a plain black duffel bag with no logo, no monogram, nothing that announces what is inside it or who is carrying it. In the front pocket of the hoodie, where another woman might carry lip balm or a phone charger, Simone carries a small enamel pin shaped like a pair of wings. It is chipped at one edge. It is 31 years old. It belonged to her mother. Eleanor Ellison worked as a flight attendant for 22 years, for a regional carrier that no longer exists, and on the day, her daughter graduated from Spelman College with honors. Eleanor was let go without severance, without a hearing, and without an explanation that held up to any scrutiny. 3 weeks after she filed a formal complaint about being passed over for a purser position she had trained 4 white colleagues to earn instead of her, nobody investigated, nobody apologized. Eleanor Ellison spent the last 6 years of her working life driving for a car service, wearing her old airline pin on her collar anyway, because she said the wings were hers even if the company wasn't. Simone has carried that pin in every hoodie pocket, every blazer pocket, every duffel bag pocket for 11 years. She has never told a single business reporter about it. It is not for them. There is a specific memory Simone returns to on hard mornings, and this is a hard morning. She is 9 years old, sitting in the back seat of her mother's old Buick outside a regional airport hangar, watching Eleanor walk out of a supervisor's office with her chin held perfectly level and her eyes perfectly dry, climb into the driver's seat, and say nothing for 11 minutes until they reached a stoplight, at which point she finally looked at her daughter in the rearview mirror and said, "Baby, they can take the uniform. They cannot take the wings." Do you understand the difference? Simone did not understand it then. She understands it completely now, 27 years later. Sitting in a first-class lounge at O'Hare in a hoodie instead of a boardroom blazer, deliberately, because some mornings the wings matter more than the uniform, and Simone has never once forgotten which one her mother actually owned. She built Meridian Dynamics on that distinction. Every contract she has ever signed, every acquisition she has ever closed, has been engineered around a single unspoken rule she should never written into a mission statement, because it does not belong on a wall. Nobody who works for her will ever again be told that 22 years of loyalty is worth less than one uncomfortable conversation about who gets promoted. She has turned down 2 acquisitions in the past 18 months after due diligence revealed exactly the kind of quiet, buried discrimination pattern that ended her mother's career. And she walked away from both deals rather than inherit the rot along with the balance sheet. Skyline Airways was supposed to be different. Skyline Airways was supposed to be clean. Simone does not yet know, sitting in that quiet corner of the lounge with her eyes closed and her duffel bag against her shins, that in less than 2 hours she is going to discover exactly how wrong she was, standing in the one place she least expected to have to prove who she is, an airplane she now legally owns. At the Skyline Airways first-class pavilion, past a set of frosted glass doors that swallow the noise of the terminal hole, the air smells like white tea and cedar, and a young man named Preston stands behind a marble concierge desk, with his hair combed into a part so precise it looks drawn with a ruler. When Simone approaches, Preston's smile arrives first, and his judgment arrives half a second behind it, but it arrives fast. His eyes move from her hoodie to her sneakers, to the absence of any recognizable logo on her bag, and something in his posture closes like a door, swinging shut on its own weight. "I think you've taken a wrong turn," Preston says, not unkindly, which somehow makes it worse. "Economy check-in is back through those doors, second corridor on your left." Simone says nothing. She sets her boarding pass and her Navy passport on the marble counter, side by side, perfectly squared, the way she squares every document before a negotiation. Preston looks at the pass. He looks at the name. He looks at her again, and this time the flush that creeps up his neck is not embarrassment so much as irritation that he has to redo the math. "My apologies, Miss Ellison," he says, in a tone that apologizes for nothing. "We don't often see first-class passengers dressed so casually." He does not ask why that should matter. Neither does Simone. She takes her documents back and walks into the lounge to find the quietest corner she can, because in 58 minutes she has a flight to catch and a mother's grave to visit, and Preston is not worth the 58 minutes. But watch the pin. It is in her pocket right now, and it is going to matter more than anyone in this airport can imagine, because in 9 hours it is going to be sitting on a conference table in front of federal regulators, and everyone who touched it with contempt this morning is going to remember exactly how they looked at a woman in a hoodie and decided she didn't belong. What Simone does not know, sitting in her quiet corner of the lounge with her eyes closed, is that a much bigger storm is already forming at Gate B12, and it has nothing to do with her until it has everything to do with her. 40 minutes before boarding, a man named Marcus Kellerman walks into the Skyline priority line without a reservation and without patience. Kellerman is 51 years old, the founder of a hedge fund called Cresthaven Capital, and he is the kind of man who has never once in his adult life waited for anything longer than the time it takes to raise his voice. 3 years ago, Kellerman tried to short Meridian Dynamics stock in an aggressive, coordinated campaign meant to tank the company during a vulnerable quarter. Simone found out about it 11 days before it would have worked, restructured her debt overnight, and watched Cresthaven Capital lose $410 million of client money in 6 weeks. Kellerman has never forgiven that loss, and he has never once connected it to a face. Because he has never once looked closely enough at anyone he considers beneath him to remember what they look like. "I fly this route every month," Kellerman tells the gate agent, a woman named Denise Ford, who has worked for Skyline for 9 years, and who knows exactly what happens to gate agents who make wealthy men wait. "I want 1A. I always fly 1A, figure it out." Denise checks her screen. Seat 1A is occupied. Confirmed. Ticketed, paid in full 3 months ago by a passenger named Simone Ellison. No corporate account flagged. No VIP tier attached. Just a name Denise doesn't recognize, on a seat a very recognizable man wants. Denise calls her senior purser, a 22-year veteran named Vivian Hartley, who built her entire career on the conviction that catering to the right kind of passenger is not a courtesy, it is the job. "Who's in 1A?" Vivian asks. "Simone Ellison. No status tags. Standard fare. Bump her," Vivian says, without a pause long enough to be called hesitation. Tell her equipment change. Tell her whatever keeps her calm. I am not having Marcus Kellerman on the phone with corporate because some nobody is sitting in his seat. That's a passenger Bill of Rights violation if we downgrade without documented cause, Denise says, because she has read the manual even if nobody else on this crew has bothered to. "I don't care about the manual, Denise. I care about my pension, and I care about keeping a 9-figure client happy. Move her. If she complains, give her a voucher and a smile." The decision takes less than 30 seconds, and in those 30 seconds, 3 people who do not yet know that the company beneath their feet changed ownership at 3:52 that morning decide, casually, almost bored, to strip a paying passenger of a seat she is legally entitled to, because her name means nothing to them, and a stranger's temper means everything. At 8:14 a.m., the boarding call for Flight 205 echoes through the pavilion. Simone gathers her briefcase and her duffel, her body aching with a specific hollow exhaustion that comes only from 41 hours without sleep, and walks down the private jet bridge with nothing on her mind but a flatbed seat and 7 hours of unconsciousness. She hands her boarding pass to Denise. The scanner beeps, sharp and red, and Denise's face rearranges itself into the practiced sympathy of someone who has done this exact performance before. "Ms. Ellison, I'm so sorry. There's been a complication. Due to an aircraft equipment change, Seat 1A is no longer available." Simone knows the fleet down to the tail numbers. Flight 205 is a Boeing 787. Skyline operates 6 of them, and none of them have alternate first-class configurations. There was no equipment change. Denise blinks, caught off guard by the specificity, and recovers with the only tool left in her kit. "Regardless, ma'am, the seat is unavailable. We can offer you our premium cabin and a travel voucher for the inconvenience." "I paid $9,400 for a lie-flat suite," Simone says, her voice dropping into something quieter and far more dangerous than anger. "I am not sitting in a recliner." A new voice answers her before Denise can. Vivian Hartley has stepped off the aircraft and onto the bridge. Blonde hair sprayed into a helmet that has not moved in 9 years, and her eyes travel down the length of Simone's hoodie with an expression somewhere between disgust and satisfaction, as though this particular outfit confirms a theory she has held since the day she was hired. "I'm the senior purser on this flight," Vivian announces to the small crowd of economy passengers now filing past and pretending not to listen. "The seat has been reassigned to a VIP passenger. You will accept the new seat, or you will be removed from this flight entirely." Before Simone can answer, Heavy footsteps arrive behind her, and Marcus Kellerman shoulders past without a glance in her direction, shouting into a phone clenched against his ear. "Tell them to short it harder. They're idiots," he barks, then snaps his fingers at Vivienne without breaking stride. "Beatrix, darling, tell me my suite is ready." Vivienne's entire posture melts into warmth. "Of course, Mr. Kellerman, 1A is pristine and waiting. Right this way." Simone watches the transformation happen in real time, watches 30 years of practiced deference bend itself instantly around a man who has never once earned it, and something in her chest goes very, very still. She knows this man. She knows exactly what $410 million of his client's money looks like disappearing in 6 weeks, because she is the one who made it disappear. He does not recognize her at all. To him, she is furniture in his way. "You bumped me for him," Simone says, turning back to Vivienne and Denise, her voice flat and even. "There was no equipment failure. You canceled a paid, confirmed seat because a louder man walked up without a reservation." Vivienne's smile vanishes entirely. "Lower your voice, Ms. Ellison. Mr. Kellerman is a highly valued partner of this airline, and what am I?" Simone asks, so quietly that Vivienne has to lean in to hear it. "You are currently causing a disturbance." Vivienne snaps, loud enough now that heads turn 2 rows deep into the cabin behind her. "You have 2 choices. Walk to seat 34J in the back of this aircraft and be grateful we're letting you fly at all. Or I will have airport security remove you from this terminal in handcuffs." Which is it? In Simone's briefcase, 11 inches from Vivienne's elbow, sits a signed acquisition agreement proving she owns the literal aluminum tube everyone is standing inside. She could open the case right now. She could end this in 4 seconds. But Simone Ellison did not build an 11-year empire by moving fast when patience would move further. And something colder than anger has settled into her now, a stillness that feels less like restraint and more like a decision. She wants to know exactly how deep this rot goes before she starts cutting it out. "Fine," she says, "take me to 34J. Walking through a first-class cabin as a demoted passenger is a specific engineered humiliation, and Vivienne does not spare her an inch of it, walking half a step ahead the entire way, so that every seated passenger can watch a woman in a college hoodie get marched to the back like a stray that wandered in. They pass Suite 1A, where Marcus Kellerman already has his shoes off and is barking at a junior attendant to pour his scotch faster. They pass through business class, where an older man in a cardigan lowers his newspaper just enough to watch, says nothing, and raises it again. They reach row 34, wedged between a screaming infant and a man eating an aggressively pungent tuna sandwich, and Vivienne points to the middle seat with the flat satisfaction of someone closing a difficult sale. "Seat 34J. Enjoy your flight." She turns on her heel and marches back toward the front of the plane. Simone stands in the aisle and does not sit down. She thinks of the 70-hour weeks. She thinks of the 2-desk office above the laundromat, and the winter the heat broke, and she wore fingerless gloves to type contracts at 2 in the morning. She thinks of her mother's 22 years, and the pin in her pocket, and the fact that she has just spent $5.6 billion to own the very aircraft she is being told does not have room for her. "No," she says out loud, to no one, and turns around. A junior flight attendant tries to stop her at the curtain. She walks through him, like he is made of the same fabric as the curtain itself. Vivienne is at the forward galley, pouring champagne when she looks up and sees Simone standing in the aisle again, and her face contorts into something raw and furious. "What do you think you're doing? Get back to your seat this instant." "I'm going to my seat," Simone says, and she means 1A, and she stops directly outside it. Marcus Kellerman looks up from his tablet, irritated by the interruption to his silence. "What is the meaning of this, Vivienne? Why is she loitering by my suite?" "I am handling it, Mr. Kellerman. My deepest apologies," Vivienne stammers, before rounding on Simone with real venom now. You have crossed a line. You are interfering with the operation of this aircraft. I am calling the captain. She snatches the interphone and presses it hard enough that the plastic clicks audibly. 10 seconds later, the cockpit door swings open, and Captain Grady Whitfield steps out, 58 years old, 4 gold stripes gleaming on each shoulder, moving with the particular swagger of a man who has never once had his authority questioned by anyone who mattered. "What's the problem, Vivian?" he asks, his voice pitched to carry, designed to intimidate rather than inform. "This passenger," Vivian says, pointing a manicured finger, "was reassigned due to an operational necessity and is now harassing our VIP guest and refusing crew instructions." Grady steps in close to Simone, using his height the way some men use their hands, crowding the space until there is barely 6 inches of air between them. "Listen very carefully," he says, low and slow. "I am the master of this vessel. My word is federal law the moment those doors close. You are currently 1 sentence away from committing a felony. Turn around, walk to the back of this aircraft, and sit down, or I will have the Port Authority drag you off in handcuffs, and I will personally see to it you never fly this airline again." Simone does not step back. She does not blink. She tilts her wrist, glances at the slim gold watch her mother gave her the year before she died, and notes, almost absently, that it is exactly 8:22 in the morning. For 1 full second, nothing in the cabin moves. The hum of the auxiliary power unit seems to grow louder in the silence. The way a held breath grows louder the longer it's held, and every eye in first class is fixed on the woman in the faded hoodie, who has just been threatened with felony charges, and has not so much as swallowed hard. Then she reaches into her pocket, not for the wings pin, not yet, but for her phone, and she dials a number without looking away from Captain Whitfield's face. "Desmond," she says, the moment the call connects, her voice carrying clean and flat through the entire hushed cabin. "I'm at gate 205. We have a personnel situation on the Skyline side. I need Directive 9 initiated on the flight crew roster, effective immediately." In a war room 40 stories above downtown Chicago, Desmond Reyes, Simone's chief operating officer, goes very still over a stack of unsigned press releases. "Directive 9? Simone, the ink is barely dry. The market doesn't even know we closed yet. Who exactly am I terminating?" "Start with gate agent Denise Ford. Then senior purser Vivian Hartley. Then the captain of this aircraft, Grady Whitfield." Grady lets out a booming, incredulous laugh that echoes off the cabin walls. "Is this some kind of stunt? You work for Skyline, little lady, not the other way around. You are a raving lunatic." Marcus Kellerman chuckles from his suite without even looking up. "Just call security, Grady. She's clearly having an episode." Simone lowers the phone slightly and locks eyes with the captain, and something in the sheer, terrible calm of her gaze makes his laugh falter halfway through its second wave. "Desmond," she continues, never breaking eye contact, "ground this aircraft, pull the flight plan, suspend all 3 security credentials, freeze their pensions and severance, pending a discrimination review." "Done," Desmond says. "Give me exactly 7 minutes to route it through the FAA liaison and the Skyline board." 7 minutes, Simone repeats, and hangs up and slides the phone back into her pocket, right next to the enamel wings, and looks at Grady Whitfield the way a judge looks at a verdict already written. "You don't work for Skyline anymore, Captain. Because as of 3:52 this morning, Skyline Airways belongs to me. I am your chief executive officer. You have 7 minutes to collect your things and get off my aircraft." The clock starts, and for exactly 4 seconds, absolutely nobody in first class moves, not even to breathe, because the sentence hanging in the recycled cabin air is either the boldest lie any of them have ever heard, or it is the most expensive mistake 3 careers have ever made in under 10 minutes, and none of them yet know which. Captain Whitfield recovers first, the way arrogant men always do, with a laugh loud enough to paper over the crack Simone's stare has already made in him. CEO of Skyline. You expect me to believe the chief executive of a multi-billion-dollar airline is standing in my galley in gym clothes. You are out of your mind. Vivienne, Page Ground Security. I want this woman removed before I finish my checklist. Right away, Captain, Vivienne says, reaching for the intercom with fingers that tremble just slightly. Though her voice has already recovered its old smugness, bolstered now by the captain's certainty standing beside her own. Simone does not argue. She simply steps back, crosses the aisle, and sits down without being invited in the empty suite directly across from Marcus Kellerman, 1B, and folds her hands in her lap. It's 8:24, she says, mostly to herself. 5 minutes left. Kellerman finally sets down his scotch and leans forward, his tailored suit crinkling across his shoulders. Whoever you are, I don't know if this is some social media stunt, or if you're off your medication, but you are delaying my flight, and my time is worth considerably more than yours. Simone turns her head slowly to look at him for the first time since she sat down. Is it, Marcus? Because 3 years ago, when Cresthaven tried to short Meridian Dynamics into the ground, your fund lost $410 million of your client's money in 6 weeks. From where I'm sitting, your time hasn't been especially profitable lately. The color drains out of Marcus Kellerman's face so completely that he looks, for a moment, like a man 20 years older than he is. He stares at her, at the hoodie, at the eyes he has never once bothered to look into until this exact second, and the realization arrives like a physical blow to the sternum. He never recognized her because he never once looked at her long enough to memorize a face. Their entire war was fought through proxy boards and press releases and stock tickers, never in person, and now the ghost that cost him $410 million is sitting across the aisle in a college hoodie 5 minutes from owning the plane he is currently sitting in. You, he says, his voice losing every trace of its bluster. You're Ellison. I'm Ellison, Simone confirms, and there is no triumph in her voice at all, only the flat certainty of someone reading a fact off a page. And in about 4 minutes, I'm also your airline's landlord, its largest creditor, and the person who signs off on whether Cresthaven Capital ever gets invited to another Skyline corporate account again. You might want to think very carefully about how loudly you keep talking, Marcus. Kellerman's mouth opens and nothing useful comes out of it. For the first time since he boarded, he says nothing at all, and the silence coming off him is somehow louder than every sentence he has shouted since he walked into the priority line 40 minutes earlier. Watch this moment closely, because it is going to repeat itself twice more before this flight lands, in 2 very different rooms, with 2 very different men, and neither of them is going to handle it any better than Marcus Kellerman is handling it right now. Nobody in the cabin has said a word for almost a full minute, which is its own kind of confession, because in a room, this quiet silence is a choice everyone is actively making. A retired appellate judge named Harold Bishop sits in seat 2C with a newspaper he stopped reading 4 minutes ago. And he has watched this entire sequence unfold with the particular stillness of a man who spent 30 years on the bench, learning exactly when speaking makes things better, and when it only makes them louder. He has already quietly turned his phone sideways and pressed record, tucked against his knee, where no one can see the red dot glowing. He says nothing. 2 rows back, a young flight attendant named Jasmine Reeve, 6 weeks into her very first job out of training, stands frozen near the galley curtain, with a stack of napkins in her hand she has forgotten she is holding. She has watched Vivienne Hartley humiliate 2 other passengers this same month for the crime of looking like they didn't belong, and both times Jasmine told herself she would say something the next time. This is the next time. Her mouth is dry, her hands are shaking. She does not say anything, and the shame of that silence sits in her stomach like a stone she is going to carry off this plane, whether it lands safely or not. At 8:26 a.m. Exactly 1 minute before Desmond Reyes's 7-minute clock runs out, a soft chime sounds from the flight deck tablet mounted beside the cockpit door, the kind of chime that normally announces a routine weather update. Vivian, still gripping the intercom, glances at it out of habit and freezes mid-sentence. The screen has changed. Where the Skyline Airways operations banner usually sits, a new header has replaced it in stark red letters. Ownership transfer complete. Meriden Dynamics Holdings. All crons pending. Review. Vivian's mouth opens and no sound comes out of it. Captain Whitfield leans over her shoulder to read it himself, and his jaw works twice before any words emerge. "This has to be a system error," he says. But his voice has lost its boom, dropped down into something smaller and far less certain. "Systems don't lie about billion-dollar acquisitions, Captain," Simone says, standing now, smoothing the front of her faded hoodie with a calm that has become, in the space of 6 minutes, the single most frightening thing anyone in that cabin has ever witnessed. "You had 7 minutes. You have used all of them arguing with me instead of packing your things." The second layer of proof arrives 90 seconds later, and it does not come from Simone at all, which is exactly why it lands so much harder. The interphone chimes, and Denise Ford's voice comes through, shaking badly, from the gate she never actually left. "Captain Whitfield, this is Denise. I need you to hear this from someone who isn't her. Corporate Legal just called the gate directly. They confirmed it. Windward Holdings sold to Meridian Dynamics at 3:52 this morning. Simone Ellison is listed on the transfer documents as Chief Executive Officer. I've seen the paperwork myself. It's real." Vivian's carefully sprayed composure finally breaks, not into an apology, but into something closer to panic, dressed up as defiance. "This is absurd," she says too loudly, to no one and everyone. "I have 22 years of exemplary service. I followed procedure. I was protecting a valued client relationship. Any reasonable purser would have made the same call." Captain Whitfield straightens his 4 gold stripes, as though they might still mean something in the next 30 seconds. "I was maintaining order and safety aboard my aircraft. That is my legal responsibility regardless of who signs the paychecks." Neither of them says the word sorry. Neither of them looks at Simone and asks what her mother's name was, or why a college hoodie was on her body instead of a blazer, or whether either of those things should have ever mattered enough to bump a paying passenger to seat 34J in the first place. They keep explaining, they keep justifying, and that, more than the boarding pass, more than the raised voices, more than the threat of handcuffs, is the thing Simone Ellison will remember longest about this flight. Not that they were cruel, but that even staring straight at the consequences, neither of them could bring themselves to believe they had done anything wrong. Desmond Reyes's voice returns through Simone's phone, patched now through the cabin's overhead system at her request, so that every remaining passenger in first class hears it in real time. "Confirmed and processed," he says. "Denise Ford, Vivian Hartley, and Grady Whitfield are terminated effective immediately, credentials revoked, pending a full discrimination review by outside counsel. Ground crew is already positioned at the jet bridge." Grady Whitfield opens his mouth once more, and Simone raises a single hand, not sharply, not with any theater at all, just enough to stop him before the next excuse can leave his throat. "Save it for the review board, Captain. You have exactly 90 seconds to be off this aircraft before I have you escorted." He goes. Vivian goes after him, chin lifted, still muttering about 22 years and reasonable calls, still certain, even now, walking down the jet bridge for the last time in a Skyline uniform, that history will eventually side with her version of events. Denise Ford, waiting at the gate, with her termination. Notice already open on a tablet in a supervisor's hands, is the only one of the three who says a single true sentence before she turns and walks away. I told her it violated the passenger Bill of Rights, she says quietly, to no one, to the floor, to the version of herself who spoke up and got overruled anyway. I told her, it is not an apology either, but it is closer to one than anything the other two manage all day. Retired Judge Harold Bishop finally lowers his newspaper all the way and looks at Simone with something like recognition passing between two people who have both spent careers being underestimated by rooms that assumed authority only wears one uniform. He does not say anything grand. He simply nods once, folds his phone screen down, and slides it into his jacket pocket, the recording safe. Jasmine Reeve, still frozen by the galley curtain, finally moves, and what she does is small. She pours a glass of water, walks it to Simone's seat, and sets it down without a word, her hand trembling the entire way. It is not courage exactly. It is the first honest gesture anyone in a Skyline uniform has offered Simone all morning. And Simone looks up at the young woman's shaking hands and says, quietly, "Thank you for seeing it," which is not a small thing to say to someone who spent the whole confrontation too afraid to speak, because it tells her that being seen and staying silent are not the same failure, and there is still time to choose differently next time. By the time Flight 205 pushes back from the gate, 40 minutes late, with a new captain and a substitute crew and Marcus Kellerman sitting very quietly in 1A with his tablet dark and untouched for the remainder of the flight, Simone Ellison is finally sitting in the seat she paid for. She does not gloat. She closes her eyes, and for the first time in 41 hours, she actually sleeps. The enamel wings pin still tucked in the pocket against her hip, and somewhere over Ohio she dreams, briefly and without warning, of her mother's uniform hanging on the back of a kitchen door in Detroit, the one Eleanor Ellison never let anyone throw away. Had. What happens over the next 4 months does not happen quietly, and it does not happen to just 3 people. Judge Bishop's recording, combined with the internal call logs Desmond Reyes pulls the following week. Vivian's voice ordering the downgrade, her own words, "I don't care about the manual, I care about my pension," is turned over not to a gossip blog, but directly to the Department of Transportation's Office of Aviation Consumer Protection, and, separately, to the FAA. It is not the only complaint on file. The review Simone orders turns up 2 prior discrimination grievances against Vivian Hartley, both filed years apart by different passengers, both quietly closed by the previous ownership with a travel voucher and a non-disclosure clause. One of them, filed 3 years earlier, describes almost the exact same sequence of events. A black passenger in casual clothing, a downgrade dressed up as a system error, a threat of removal when he objected. The complaint was closed in 9 days, with a $500 voucher and a line in the file that reads, verbatim, "Passenger declined to pursue further." He had not declined. He had simply been told, politely, that pursuing further would go nowhere, and he believed the woman who told him that, because at the time she had no reason to lie. It is not an aberration. It is a pattern that a $5.6 billion acquisition happened to finally expose to daylight, and Simone makes sure the man who filed that 3-year-old complaint is the second person, after Jasmine Reeve, that Desmond Reyes calls personally, not with an apology drafted by legal, but with an offer to reopen the file and make it right. Marcus Kellerman's public relations firm drops him as a client within 31 hours of the recording becoming public, not because of anything he said on the plane, but because 2 additional employees at Cresthaven Capital, emboldened by the story, come forward with their own accounts of a man who has spent a decade treating everyone beneath a certain net worth as furniture. His fund's largest institutional client pulls $200 million within the week. Grady Whitfield's commercial pilot license is suspended pending a formal FAA review into abuse of command authority, And 8 months later, when the suspension becomes permanent, he takes a job managing an airport shuttle service outside Cincinnati, wearing a different uniform with no gold stripes on the shoulders at all. He does not apologize publicly. Not once, not in the review hearing, not in the local news interview he agrees to, and then regrets. But 4 months after the incident, alone in a break room during a slow shift, he watches a segment about Skyline Airways' new non-discrimination training program on a muted television bolted to the wall, reads the caption scrolling underneath it, and sits with his hands very still on the table for a long moment before getting up and turning the television off, without a word. Nobody sees it happen. Nobody records it. It is the only honest thing Grady Whitfield does in this entire story, and it happens where absolutely no one is watching to give him credit for it. Vivian Hartley never gets that moment. She spends the following year insisting to anyone who will listen that she was following procedure, that the aviation industry has lost its mind, that a woman ought to be allowed to run her own cabin without a billionaire looking over her shoulder. She does not find work in luxury hospitality again. The industry, it turns out, has a longer memory than she expected, and 22 years of experience mean considerably less than one recorded sentence played back in a federal review. Simone Ellison's does not spend those 4 months gloating either. She spends them rebuilding Skyline Airways culture from the operations manual up, starting with a new, company-wide policy she names, without any committee input at all, the Eleanor Standard, a binding requirement that any employee found discriminating against a passenger based on appearance, race, or perceived status faces immediate termination. No exceptions for tenure, no exceptions for who the offending passenger happened to be protecting. She funds a scholarship in her mother's name for children of airline employees. The first recipient, a 19-year-old whose mother was a gate agent for 11 years before the merger and never once made it past that title, and she keeps Jasmine Reeve. Not out of pity, but because 6 weeks into her first job, standing frozen and terrified in a galley with a stack of napkins in her hands, Jasmine still found the courage to pour a glass of water and carry it across an aisle nobody was making her cross. A year later, Jasmine is training new flight attendants herself, and the first thing she teaches them, every single class, is that the passenger in the hoodie deserves exactly the same respect as the passenger in the suit, because you will never actually know which one signs your paycheck. 4 months after that morning at O'Hare, Simone Ellison drives to a small cemetery outside Newark, a year later than she meant to visit, but on the very same date she always comes, carrying a fresh bundle of white carnations in one hand and, in her coat pocket, the same chipped enamel wings pin she has carried for 11 years. She kneels at her mother's headstone, brushes away a season of fallen leaves, and sets the flowers down exactly the way she has every year, since Eleanor died. Then she takes the pin from her pocket, turns it once in her fingers, so the morning light catches the chip in the enamel, and presses it gently into the soft grass at the base of the stone, where it will stay for exactly as long as the wind allows. "They're flying under your name now, too," she says quietly, to no one who can answer her. And for a moment, the only sound in the cemetery is the wind moving through a row of bare November trees, and it is enough. If this story reached something in you, not because of how it ended, but because you recognized someone in it, maybe the woman in the hoodie, maybe the flight attendant too afraid to speak, maybe even the man who never once looked closely enough at the people around him to see who they really were, then let it reach someone else too. Share it with anyone who has ever been sized up and dismissed in under 5 seconds by a stranger who never learned their name. And tell me honestly, in the comments, which seat you have sat in before, 1A 34J, or standing frozen by the curtain with the water in your hand. I read every single one.